Welcome back, my friends. Today on the channel, we're going to do the monthly question and answer video. Once a month on the Posts tab, my YouTube channel, I'll put out a question prompt such as this one. Down below, you can ask me anything about anything, read each other's questions, and then thumbs up the ones you want me to respond to. Thank you so much to everyone who left a question or read each other's questions. The cutoff for today's video was 40 thumbs up. Here's the top ranked question from Wild Q-Tip 6482. How much longer do you think the Russian economy can last at this pace? That's a good question. I don't think anyone over 3 years ago expected Russia to last this long, given their abrupt severance from international markets and global supply chains. But I'm going to defer to the experts. Budanov has way more information and intelligence than me, and in October of 2023, he predicted Russia has economic strength to fight until 2025. This was 2 years ago, and it's now 2025. So how is Russia doing exactly? And in the first year of the war, I didn't understand. It didn't make sense to me that, okay, this is the Russian budget. This is what they want to spend on the war. This is how much their economy is hurting. Surely, there should be strain and breakage at some point. So I've talked about this extensively in previous videos. Why is the Russian economy so difficult to crack? And it's because they're food independent and they're energy independent. If you want to collapse an economy or a civilization, usually they have to have shortages or run out of energy, or shortages and run out of food. So the Russian economy is tough to crack, especially when their people are willing to suffer so willingly for the Tsar. But now I do deeply understand what exactly is going on, and I'm currently reading a very informative book. It's called Putin's People by Catherine Belton. And this is a very thick read. It's very detailed. And this book talks about the rise of Putin's oligarchs. Not necessarily the original oligarchs of the 90s under Boris Yeltsin, but since Putin took office in 1999, he's been installing capitalist billionaires in important industries that are loyal to him, sometimes arresting and replacing the old oligarchs of the 90s with men who are firmly loyal to him. And at the moment, Putin is leveraging all of their wealth, all of their assets, to keep this war going and to keep the Russian economy going. And this is really sadistic because the Russians understand that communism failed and that communism stunted the economic growth and prosperity of Russia for decades. But this new form of modern Russian capitalism, it's not what we have here in America. Bill Gates, love him or hate him, he created Microsoft, so he gets to keep the tens of billions of dollars that he's accumulated from his business. Same is true with Mark Zuckerberg. Love him or hate him, he's a self-made man. He made Facebook. So that's the American Western ideal of a billionaire. They started a company, Jeff Bezos, whoever, and they got absurdly rich. That doesn't happen in Russia. Putin does not allow people to become self-made billionaires. He picks people loyal to him and then puts them in charge of companies or industries so that when he wants to call on a favor, they'll do what he says. And this is what's currently happening. Billionaires don't have billions of dollars sitting in a bank account or a money vault. They have assets. And you can borrow money with the assets being collateral. And I don't understand why, but there are still global investors. Indian investors, Chinese investors, Saudi, Iranian, whoever. Whoever has money in the world. And for the last 3 years, Putin's inner circle has been taking on debt. They've been leveraging their wealth and assets to keep the Russian economy going and to keep the military going. This has been revealed by Solyov talking to defense contractors. So yeah, the good question is, how much longer can Russia do this? And there has to be a breaking point somewhere. But nobody knows. Nobody knows how deep Russia can go in private debt, in corporate debt. We're not talking about the government budgets or the government debt to keep this war going for Putin. We don't know. Putin claims Russia is recruiting nearly twice as many soldiers as Ukraine. Putin bragged the other day that they're still recruiting 60,000 volunteers every month into the Russian military. This is very bad for your economy. I'm assuming these 60,000 Russian men recruited every month had a day job. They were doing something productive. They were contributing to the economy. And now they've been plucked from a productive role in society and are being sent in the military to be an economic burden on the nation. There is no value in destroying Ukraine. There's a short-term economic value with deficit spending and Putin tapping the wealth reserves of Russia to keep this war going. But that's not how you grow your economy. That's not how you make your nation more prosperous. If you have the choice between building bombs to blow up apartment buildings in Dnipro versus building a school or a hospital in your own country or an airport, nothing Russia is doing economically is beneficial in the long run, but Putin doesn't care. I think he at this point just enjoys this war. I also do want to mention the price of oil because this does compose a third of the Russian budget, in addition to the budget and balance sheets of Russia's largest companies, Gazprom and what have you. And the price goes down. And I do want to just comment on the price of oil and why drops at this point are more significant. Russia has a break-even price for their oil. We don't know what it is. Maybe it's $45 a barrel, maybe it's $50. But let's just say that it's $40. A drop from $80 a barrel to $60, when your break-even is $40, that is a 50% drop in your profitability. So the difference between 180 and 80 and 60 is very significant the lower you get to that break-even point, because you still have to pay for employee salaries and production costs and shipping. If this goes lower, there is no profits. There's zero. If this keeps dropping and hits Russia's break-even point, they have to keep the wells going because they can't afford to close them. That would be expensive and difficult to retap them. This is what we're fighting for in 2025, and honestly, the way the global economy is going right now, I don't think this is going to be a good year for Russia's energy industry. Next question. Can you tell us more about the gathering of Russian troops and vehicles to the Finnish border? From their perspective, can we call it the Finnish line? This is a story breaking this week. Satellite images show Russian troops buildup at NATO border. And my first thought is, are those real? Are they operational? Is Russia actually sending operational armored vehicles to the Finnish border when they obviously don't have enough in Ukraine? Or are these wooden, inflatable, or broken? And we have to assume they're real, but what's their purpose? And I don't expect Russia to invade Finland anytime soon, but I think Russia genuinely worries about an invasion from NATO or an invasion from Finland. They have lots of strategic and important military assets near the Arctic Circle, and there's only one road. There's only a single road going north through this area to get to their Arctic naval port and air base. It's a deterrent factor. I don't think an imminent invasion of Finland is happening anytime soon. I 100% believe that Russia would invade the Baltics before ever attempting to attack Finland. Next question is from Sumai Chin. If the war drags on until Russia cannot financially sustain it any longer, how do you expect that would play out? Would Russia try to announce a ceasefire, stop attacking, and gaslight Ukraine if they try to get their territory back? Or do you expect Russia to try and fight on regardless until their population decides they've had enough and do something? I fully expect at this point the eventual breakup of Russia. I think it's inevitable from a demographic standpoint, but Putin is accelerating it. Every day that Putin keeps this war going, economically and demographically, Russia is worse off for the rest of this century. And this is not a positive thing. Every time Russia goes through a revolution, okay, well, I guess the Soviet dissolution doesn't count, but the 1917 revolution, a lot of people died. And if Russia were to dissolve and break up, all of these regions would be fighting over mineral deposits, oil and gas fields. A lot of these regional warlords would have nuclear weapons, and now that we've set the precedent with Ukraine, people are never going to want to give up nuclear weapons. You cannot convince people to give up their nukes, because that's the only deterrent to stop people from attacking you. What I would like to see is Russia broken up into Belarus-sized nations. There's 140 million Russian people. Ideally, let's create 14 new countries. I'm not saying this because I want this to happen. I want Russia to stop this war and they can stay together as long as they're peaceful. But Putin is driving this scenario. Putin is making this outcome inevitable by keeping this war going. And I don't see a scenario in which Russia stays a solvent and coherent state by the time we get to the end of this. And to stop this cycle from repeating, to stop the next Tsar of Russia from talking about empire and attacking their neighbors, we just need to create regional governments responsive to the local people. And let's just create new Belarus-sized countries. 140 million people, each country is about 10 million, 14 new countries. Just because you speak the same language doesn't mean you have to be the same nation. How many separate Arabic-speaking countries are there in the world? How many separate Spanish-speaking countries are there in the world? English-speaking countries in the world? They're the remnants of empire. And truly, the Russian Federation is the world's last standing empire. Concerning demographics, if you guys know about Peter Zion, he never shuts up about this. But it's true. Looking at the population pyramid, and Russia is throwing away and scaring away a generation of young people. Once you enter terminal decline from a demographic standpoint, it never gets better. Unless Putin starts mandating that every 16-year-old in Russia starts having 6 kids each, you can't come back from this. Where is Russia going to be at the end of this century? And it looks bleak. It's not going to be positive. I also strongly believe as soon as there's any kind of political upheaval in Russia, China is going to make their move. China is going to want to get back the territory in outer Manchuria that they lost to the Russians in war in the 1800s. And they'll probably just slice north and say everything over here now belongs to China. That's our oil and gas. That's our access to the Arctic Ocean. Would that mean nuclear war to any factions in the West? And I really believe that China knows what they're doing. And if Russia starts to break up, they'll just fund and legitimize governments in the West if they support their claims to territory in the East. So if there's different factions or groups that all have nukes, China's going to pick their favorites and then try and get those guys to fight each other while they march north and steal all this land. I'm not saying this is going to happen next year or the year after, but in 20 years, in 30 years, like the Chinese are really good at thinking long term, and 100% at some point this century, they're going to want all of this territory for themselves. Next question, so the Crimea Bridge. Here's an update. It's still standing. And Ukraine did successfully do a lot of damage to this bridge. I think Ukrainian intelligence was involved in the first attack. Was this late 2022? There definitely have been other attempts to bring the bridge down over the last 3 years. You just don't know about them because they weren't successful. How many other bomb plots were sabotaged or foiled by Russia? How many missile strikes were launched, but Russia successfully shot them down? We don't know, and the importance of the bridge is not as much as it was in 2022, because Russia has already realigned the rail networks in the occupied territories. Strategic rail network repaired and relaunched by Russian forces. Russia built a brand new line to get away from the front. But the front has shifted. The Russians have made progress by like 10 kilometers over the last 3 years. And that was enough to make these rail lines more safe and secure from HIMARS attacks or drones. So Russia can use the rail line through the occupied territories to resupply Crimea. I don't think Ukraine is sparing the bridge or saving the bridge. I just don't think they believe they can successfully take it down, and there's other places they would rather allocate their time and resources. That could change in the future, but for right now, I don't think the bridge is going to come down anytime soon. Next question. What would it take to get Trump out of office before the midterm elections? That's a great question, and my honest answer is either a heart attack or a stroke. Donald Trump is the oldest man to ever be elected president of the United States, and he's severely overweight. And he has the most stressful job in the world. So when you actually look at the actuary tables of a man his age and his weight, statistically, it doesn't look good for him. I don't think physically he is going to make it as president through January 20th of 2029. So there's a countdown clock. We don't know what it is, but Donald Trump will eventually die of natural causes. I don't want anything bad to happen to him. I don't want anyone to assassinate him. That would be terrible. That would create more problems, I think, than it would solve. But I do want Congress eventually to impeach this guy. Ideally, impeach him and J.D. Vance at the same time for corruption or any of the laws they've broken since taking office. There was a point 2 months ago where I thought congressional Republicans might take action against him. But honestly, Donald Trump is scaling back his more insane ideas. Donald Trump talking about invading Greenland and Canada and annexing them, that just isn't popular with the American people. It's not even popular with MAGA. When I argue with people in MAGA and I mention Canada or Greenland, they immediately shut down. They don't want to talk about it. They don't even understand why Trump is talking about invading our neighbors and stealing their land. So if Trump attempted to do that, I think there would be a movement within the Republican Party to remove him from office. But it's not popular. Trump couldn't find a way to sell it even to his own base. Additionally, I don't think the United States military right now can do anything without that information leaking. Pete Hegseth is an idiot and nobody in the military respects him. And when you come to the Pentagon, how many people with security clearances work at the Pentagon who are willing to leak sensitive information to journalists if it involves military plans to attack our democratic neighbors? This conversation is insane and stupid. Your question, though, is Trump is scaling back. To my Canadian friends, I think you're safe. To my friends in Denmark and Greenland, I think you're safe as well. So what would it take for congressional Republicans to turn on him prior to the midterms? And at this point, I don't see it happening. Next question. Jake, do you ever wonder if President Zelensky has seen or made aware of your channel and the fantastic fundraising you have done? I'll be honest, I have wondered this. Between our 4-channel fundraisers, 1.2, 1.2, 1.2, 1.1, this YouTube community has fundraised $4.8 million in the last 12 months. And I've not gotten a single inquiry from a mainstream news organization. I've been waiting. I've been waiting for someone to contact me saying, hey, we'd like to run a story or an article about you, but nope. I'm just going to keep doing my thing. I don't do it for the fame, guys. I don't do it for the fame. So my conclusion is a YouTube channel with 600,000 subscribers, that's cool, but not enough to get the president of Ukraine's attention or even mainstream media attention. Sternenko has 2 million subscribers on YouTube. He publishes in Ukrainian. He just survived an assassination attempt, so I think most people in Ukraine probably know who he is, but he also fundraises millions of dollars for the Ukrainian military. But things on my YouTube channel are changing, guys. I think the last 7 or 8 months especially have been different because I'm getting the attention of different kinds of people. And I really think if I want a higher profile, if I want to be more well-known, I need to do more podcast episodes with other well-known people, not just other YouTubers. So Malcolm Nance is a best-selling author. Stephanie Baker also is a very well-known reporter and journalist. But these 2 members of Congress, 2 months ago I interviewed Representative Jake Auchincloss, and then Representative Seth Moulton was also interviewed, but they reached out to me. I'll be honest, I didn't know who they were until their communications directors emailed me asking if they could appear on my podcast. But I've had 2 members of Congress reach out to me asking if they could do an interview. And this is great because if I can establish credibility that I give fair interviews and don't ask weird questions, more well-known people who have their own audiences that like and appreciate them, they'll meet me and they'll get to know me. So I do think more members of Congress, maybe even more mainstream media figures are going to reach out to me wanting to appear on my channel because I have an audience. If they do a podcast episode with me, I can probably guarantee them about at least 200,000 views. That's a decent size media exposure for anyone on a podcast. There are some well-known people who follow me on Twitter, and anytime this happens, it is kind of exciting. Author Ann Applebaum, she's got 600,000 followers on Twitter, and she follows me. Bill Kristol has almost 1 million followers, and he, for some reason, follows me as well. Ilya Ponomarenko, he's a Ukrainian journalist. He has over 1 million followers on Twitter, and he follows me. But no, I don't think President Zelensky knows who I am. I imagine he doesn't spend much time on social media. This is cute, I want to share this with you guys, but he only follows one person. Can you guess who he follows? And it's his wife. Next question. Hi Jake, great channel, nice dog. If Trump walks away from Ukraine and Europe, do you think this will push Europe into taking frozen Russian assets and giving them to Ukraine for their defense and reconstruction? Best wishes from the UK. No. If Trump were to walk away and detach, I don't think the EU and the G7 would use frozen Russian assets to fund this war. Technically, they're already doing that with the interest accumulating. That was the compromise. But I do wonder about this money. What more is needed? What more does it have to take for the Europeans to officially seize this money and give it to Ukraine? And especially with the election of Donald Trump, I think the Europeans are using this money as ransom. They're using it as a hostage, actually. If Russia directly attacks a NATO country or Europe, then this money will be seized and used for Europe's defense against Russia. Russia knows this. So by holding on to the money and not giving it to Ukraine, this is an extra layer of protection for NATO and Europe. I think that is ultimately the number one reason why it has not been seized and given to Ukraine. It's being used as a hostage because Putin really cares about this money. Putin cares way more about this money than any of his soldiers or any of his people. He wants this money back, and as long as it remains frozen, never mind the interest, Europe is using it for their own defense. They're still helping Ukraine. They're still doing what they can. If Russia politically collapses, there will be a legal procedure to seize this money officially, with Russia having representation. The new government of Russia is going to have to agree to reparations to rebuild Ukraine. That's always been the intention. The money will be used to benefit Ukraine, but that will only come after the war is officially over, and Europe doesn't need this money as a hostage. Not a great answer, but it's my final conclusion after 3 years of thinking about it. Next question is from Cannondale. Do you think Ukraine will ever return to its 1991 borders? Yes, if there is some kind of political upheaval or revolution in Russia. That's not a good scenario because if Russia de-evolved into revolution or civil war, probably millions would die. But unless that happens, I don't know how Ukraine could ever get Crimea back. And there is a precedent in history for this. Here's the war map for World War I. And the maximum extent of the Russian Empire was this brown line. After 2 or 3 years of fighting in World War I, this is where the front between the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians versus the Russian Empire. But then Russia went into revolution. And they told the Germans, we don't want to fight anymore, we're done. And that's not how wars end. So the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians kept advancing while Russia was in revolution and the Russian military kept retreating. So the Germans swept through Eastern Europe and then liberated all these people or created these new nations. Here is the map showing Europe in 1914. And in Central and Eastern Europe, there's only three empires. Germany, Austro-Hungary, and Russia. And then after Russia went into revolution, the Germans swept through, liberated all these people, created these buffer states, honestly. And these people got their independence. The Russians didn't like that, so they retook. Ukraine actually also briefly had independence in 1918, 1919, but it didn't last long. So to answer your question, for Ukraine to get all of their territory back, Putin has to die or be arrested, and then there has to be some kind of new government seeking financial assistance or sanctions relief or something, and politically, they're going to have to give it up. Thank you, Jake, for your steadfast support for Ukraine. My question is, why aren't the countries who support Ukraine applying the highest level of sanctions to the countries rather than companies who are enabling Russia's war machine by providing parts for drones, missiles, etc.? I think what you're asking is, why aren't we doing something about these intermediate states that are helping Russia avoid sanctions? So obviously, there are direct sanctions on Russian defense companies to buy microprocessors or components or whatever. So what the Russians do is they just tell a proxy state, Uzbekistan or Turkmenistan or whatever, buy these chips from American companies for us, and then ship them to us in Russia. All sanctions placed on Russia, Russia is evading them by going through the Maldives or Kyrgyzstan or China or whoever. And yes, I think American and European sanctions have been placed on companies helping Russia do this. But as far as going after the governments in some cases are not involved. The governments don't even know what their private companies in their countries are doing. That's not a good excuse. That's not a good answer. Diplomatic pressure can be applied to try and stop them from doing this, but it's a game of whack-a-mole. If we were to sanction the hell out of Uzbekistan because Uzbeki companies are helping Russia evade sanctions, well, Russia's then going to just go through a different country. They'll just pick a different country willing to take their money, and they'll keep avoiding sanctions. That's a disappointing answer, but the good news is that sanctions still work. When sanctioned material goes through intermediate countries, there's a markup. Uzbek companies or whoever aren't willing to do this without being compensated. So for Russia to get what they want, they're still paying a markup of 20, 30, 40, 50, 100% on this underground or black market activity. It still is hurting the Russians because it's making them pay more than the fair market rate for everything they need to build missiles. Sanctions don't stop Russia. They just slow them down, which still helps. It's still a good thing. Hello, Jake. I am very worried about what is happening in the United States. What can we Europeans do to get rid of Trump? Keep doing what you're doing. The number one thing you can do if you're not American to resist and help defeat Donald Trump is do not let a pro-Russian party take control of your government. There are proxy parties that represent the Russians and MAGA in every country. The AfD in Germany, the Reform in the UK, the Front in France. And they're all working together. They go to conferences together. They're all on the same page. Generally, they're anti-immigrants, they're anti-refugee. They want weaker social security benefits and less reliance of people on the state. Maybe at some point that was traditional conservatism, but this is a global effort to basically end liberal democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of the press. What people like Elon Musk want are just corrupt strongmen in charge of a country that can make anything happen with a stroke of a pen. Going through the normal democratic process for a business leader is infuriating. To navigate consumer protection laws, environmental laws, labor laws. Business elite don't like regulation. They would rather just have some shitty dictator in charge of the country. You bribe him, you then get whatever you want. So these parties are all based on corruption, but they have to have some kind of platform that has popular appeal. Right now it's anti-immigrants, and if you're a member of a European state upset about immigration, you have my sympathy. But please don't surrender your democracy to some shitty autocrats, comparable to Viktor Orban. We're having an election in Romania. I hope it goes well. What else can Europeans do to help? And we have to stop Elon Musk. He is the most destructive, evil man in the world. So don't support any of his companies. Don't give him money if you don't have to for some reason. But yes, it's working. The pressure being applied on Tesla, the brand, that is where the majority of Elon Musk's wealth comes from. It's caused him to scale back. You might have noticed over the last month and a half, Elon has been quieter because the Tesla board threatened to fire him for hurting the brand damage. We can't let up on the pressure. We have to stop this guy. So don't buy or drive a Tesla if you can avoid Starlink, if you can not get Tesla solar panels or that stupid robot once it comes out. And in general, I hate to say this, but if you can boycott any American company or any American products, just do it. Do it for now. Do not visit the United States to vacation for pleasure or business or whatever. We need for there to be an economic decline to break this spell that Donald Trump has cast over people. Donald Trump lies about absolutely everything, promising the world on every issue. He has no intention on delivering on anything. And Americans, I don't want it to be this way here in America, but the number one thing that everyone thinks about and cares about and worries about is money. And I don't even think it used to be this way in the United States 40 or 50 years ago, but especially with more and more Americans participating in the stock market. Something like 60% of Americans have either a 401k, an IRA, or a brokerage account. So every day people just watch their money and they check the stock market. Donald Trump, there was a lot of pushback against him, and the stock market declined 19% in response to his stupid tariffs. But now he's rolling back tariffs and the market's recovered 20%. This is a sugar rush. The United States definitely is in recession right now. People are scaling back. People are losing their jobs. Economically, things are getting worse. But it takes time for the economic data to be tallied up and then shown. We won't officially know we're in recession until September, once we have the full Q1 and Q2 data for the economy. This year is going to be a nightmare, and once the economy gets worse and the stock market goes back down, Trump will say it's Biden's fault, but people are going to blame Trump. And this is what Trump does, and this is actually genius. It's called flooding the zone. Donald Trump deliberately says and does stupid and provocative things to distract everyone, to confuse people, to emotionally and mentally exhaust you. This is what liberals have been dealing with in the United States for a decade. For 10 years, we have been fighting and arguing with the stupidest, most sadistic and evil things, and he does this on purpose to exhaust people. But this is the tweet he put out this morning. Has anyone noticed that since I said I hate Taylor Swift, she's no longer hot? So on social media right now, MAGA trolls are posting AI-generated images of fat Taylor Swift. This is what Donald Trump wants everyone talking about today. He did this deliberately to distract the American people from the Supreme Court just ruling against him, saying he can't use the Alien Enemies Act to deport Venezuelans. Trump is losing Supreme Court case after Supreme Court case after Supreme Court case because everything he's doing is illegal. I was just a little bit concerned 3 months ago that the Supreme Court would give him a free ride and a pass, and America's justice system would basically become what Russia has. But I don't think the Supreme Court's going to go along with it. Based on what I've been hearing from Brett Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Amy Barron Cohen, these are the people that Trump appointed in his first term. They're not willing to do this. They're not willing to let America become a pure autocracy. And then there's this. Conservatives blocked Trump agenda bill from advancing in a major setback for Republican leaders. At the moment in Congress, Republicans are trying to pass a giant spending bill, and this spending bill is terrible. For working class and middle class Americans, it's basically just a giant tax cut for Donald Trump and his billionaire friends. And they can't even pass the bill amongst themselves and get it out of committee because it doesn't go far enough in cuts to Medicaid and other programs that benefits or support working class and middle class Americans. And even if they come up with a version of the bill that the extreme faction likes, the moderates or the centrists then might not support it. Their majority is so razor thin, Republicans can't even agree amongst themselves. They love to fight and backstab with each other, which is why Donald Trump puts out this slop to get people to argue about fat Taylor Swift. So you're not paying attention to the trillions in dollars in tax cuts to American billionaires that will raise the deficit. and bankrupt America long term. I mean, do you see the effect it's having on me? This is what he does. This is what he's doing to everyone in the world. This is what he's been doing to Americans for 10 years. We're going to move on. Next question, where should Ukraine aim the Taurus missiles? Still an if, but I do think Germany and MERS are going to send Taurus cruise missiles. And the answer to your question is ammunition depots. This is the #1 target because if Russia doesn't have ammunition, they can't fire back and destroy buildings and kill people. The next best target is troop concentrations. Ukrainian forces destroy Russian troop concentration with a drone attack. But if they had the range of a Taurus cruise missile, yeah, you could go for some pretty large buildings inside of Russia. If Germany gives the restriction that they can only be used in the occupied territories, then the benefit won't be as high. But if they can use Taurus cruise missiles inside of Russia to go after ammunition depots, command posts, and troop concentrations, it will have an impact on the battlefield. Last question. On another channel, I've heard ominous numbers of recruitment by Russia. Do you think sheer weight of numbers could eventually lead to a Russian victory? And my answer is no. Russia, it doesn't matter how many troops they call up or how many troops they use on the battlefield, because I don't think their limitation is men as it is material. They just don't have the equipment to supply these units. They're reforming or forming brigades, and they don't have tanks or APCs or artillery systems to give them. This is what they're giving soldiers on the front lines for their supply runs. Donkeys. Donkeys. And there is a military science, like people at war colleges study this. If you're in a trench warfare environment, what is the level of troop concentrations you have in order to give your defenders a good chance of successfully defending while minimizing casualties? Same is true for going on the offense. If you just increase the number of troops on the contact line, your chance of success doesn't percent-wise go up much higher, but your casualties will go up astronomically. When an artillery shell goes off, when an FPV drone goes off, when a vehicle hits a landmine, you can have 2 troops there or you can have 20. If you have 20, you're just going to have more casualties. So Ukraine knows this, which is why when they have these trench and defensive positions, it's always a limited number of guys. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes, you could plop in 30 and they might be able to defend that trench line better with 30 guys. But then Ukraine's casualty rates would skyrocket. What Russia needs a lot of manpower for is to occupy cities. If Russia wants to occupy the city of Kharkiv, 1.5 million, or occupy the city of Zaporizhia, 700,000, then to control the city, to police the city, they would need like 70,000 soldiers stationed in the city to get it under control. But you have to take the city first. And that's what Russia can't do. Russia cannot advance through open fields because modern warfare is just too deadly. So yeah, Russia can keep conscripting, expanding the size of the military, but honestly, that just economically weakens them faster. Okay, that's all for this Q&A video. If you made it this far, you're a super fan. Thank you so much for your support and continuing to support Ukraine. That's all for this Q&A video. Till the next time, take care, everyone.